What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So we are now 2 days away from 2025, which is absolutely crazy to say. So I thought it'd be a fun way to wrap up 2024 by grading every single team's calendar year of 2024, assuming nothing wild happens in like the next 36 hours from when I'm filming this. I don't think that that's going to happen. But yeah, we're going to go through it right now. So basically the back half of the 2023-2024 season, what the teams did in the offseason, draft, free agency, all of that, on top of how their teams are trending right now. Different teams have different goals. Contenders, I'm going to weigh what they did in the 2024 playoffs more than if they're a top 3 team in the NHL right now. And rebuilding teams, I'm definitely going to focus more on their offseason and draft than the actual off-ice product. So there's different criteria for different teams, but I think you guys can probably assume that you need to do the same. So without further ado, let's get into it. And speaking of one of those teams that definitely have more of a long-term focus right now, the Calgary Flames, I'm going to give an A-. Arguably, you could go with an A on this. The end of the 2024 season, they traded extremely heavy. They decided we're not going to lock up Elias Lindholm, Noah Hanifin on these 8-year deals and just commit to being extremely mid, maybe a wild card team for the next half decade. They decided to sell. Not saying they knocked all of those deals out of the park. I think the Lindholm one was very good, but they decided to go in a certain direction. Ended up trading Jacob Markstrom, Andrew Mangiapane before the draft, and then I think they had a fantastic draft as well, getting Zane Parik, Matvei Gridin, Andrew Basha, Henry Muse, and Luke Misa. I think that they probably had the best draft in terms of where they were positioned on the board. I think San Jose, who we're going to get to, probably had a better overall haul, but considering Calgary didn't have that first overall pick, I think that they absolutely killed it. And although this season, ideally you'd want them to keep their top 10 pick to eventually jump in the draft. That's looking like that might not happen. They might end up losing their first round pick and getting Florida's instead because of the Sean Monahan deal that we've gone over on this page a decent amount of time. Still, some of their young players are playing pretty good. It's definitely a good idea to instill a winning culture, and hopefully by the end of the season they can just barely get to that like 9th or 10th overall and keep that pick. But they're definitely been a fun team. At least fans have got a fun team to watch instead of being absolutely garbage. My New York Islanders, they get a D+, man. It has definitely been a discouraging year for this core at the end of the 2024 season. They snuck back in the playoffs, but I think that was more so the Eastern Conference teams that we're going to get to kind of shitting the bed at the end of the 2023-2024 season, then the Islanders pulling off some masterful run at the end there. But yeah, they lose to Carolina in 5 games, kind of cementing that this team is not any serious playoff threat. I thought they actually did have a very good offseason when you look at the draft, picking up Cole Eiserman at, 20th overall? That was definitely a steal. And they made 2 good adds in terms of their forward core with Max Zaplakov, the number 1 European unrestricted free agent, brought him over. He's been great. Not going to be a Calder finalist, but definitely a top 5 through 7 kind of guy at 25, 26 years old. Is going to be like a 45-ish point guy. On top of Anthony Duclair, I think was a really good pickup. And now that he's back healthy, he's going to prove that. But again, not any massive moves that were going to really move the needle with this team. And as a result, they're a sub 500 team right now. I could easily see them making the playoffs, going on some kind of run to make the playoffs, but I think they'd eventually lose in the first round. This year really proved that they are what they are. They're just a mediocre team, and Sorokin has been very discouraging to start this season on top of last year being a little bit of a down year. It's definitely not a good time to be a New York Islanders fan. Hopefully they come to admit this and trade Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri, as much as that would break my heart, to kind of enter some type of rebuild, some type of thing that we're going to talk about, a different Metro team that kind of retooled and now looks good. Hopefully the New York Islanders can pull off something like that. Sticking in the state of New York, Buffalo also gets a D+. Last season, by the start of 2024, they were kind of out of the playoffs. UPL almost single-handedly willed them back into the playoffs, but they ended up missing by a decent amount in the draft. I like their draft, getting Consta Helenius, but the offseason was pretty confusing considering the fact that they bought out Jeff Skinner, saved $6.6 million next season, then only brought in Jason Zucker. That was really their only move. This season, they're going to miss the playoffs yet again after having a 13-game losing streak. It's definitely discouraging. They're not as screwed long-term as the New York Islanders, but it has definitely been an unfortunate 2024 by the Buffalo Sabres. The Florida Panthers, this one's going to be quick. You win the Stanley Cup, you get an A+. And especially when you're able to lock up guys like Carter Verhaeghe, Anton Lundell on very good deals, they're yet again going to be a high contender this season. Got their first Stanley Cup, looking like they're going to be a factor to get a second one. They're the cream of the crop right now in the NHL, and rightfully so. Easy A+. The Anaheim Ducks, I'm going to go with the C plus. Solid rookie years at the end of 2023, 2024 by Leo Carlson and Pavel Mintyukov. In the draft, I didn't like the pick at the time, and I still don't love it, but Beckett Seneca, the pick definitely looks better now, as well as Stian Solberg, I think was a solid pick. Didn't really do much in free agency. And to start this year, Dostal was balling out. That was a big positive, but basically every single other young player on this team has either plateaued or just straight up regressed. It is definitely an unfortunate start for the Anaheim Ducks, even though their record actually has them on pace for a big jump to like 73, 74 points. The young core has not really been that impressive, and especially after a guy like Trevor Zegras went down that you really was banking on to have a bounce back season. It's definitely a little bit discouraging. Anaheim, I'm not ready to say like the rebuild is a fail, it's the end of the world, but it's definitely a discouraging 2024 after coming into 2024 when you had those two young guys debuting. You thought, okay, we're going to stink this year. We're going to get a high draft pick. We might get Ivan Demidov, and then we're going to really take a step next season. That has not exactly happened for the Anaheim Ducks at this point. The Boston Bruins, I'll go with a C. They exceeded expectations last year in 2023-2024, but ended up losing to the Florida Panthers in the second round of the playoffs. That was an exciting regular season. This offseason, they had all this money to spend, end up trading Linus Ullmark. Korpisalo has been solid, but Ullmark has really been on a tear of late. That was kind of a bad deal by the Boston Bruins. They could have gotten much more for Linus Ullmark. And then in free agency, in the draft, they got Dean Letourneau, who's a long-term project. Well, I can't make any assumptions on him right now, but in free agency, they have all this money to spend. They end up getting Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. Lindholm's deal already looks pretty horrendous on top of Zadorov just being like basically what as advertised. I don't think him at 6 years, $5 million is by any means any discount. And now they had a rough start to the season, ended up firing Jim Montgomery. They're playing better right now. But again, you expected this team to really take a next step after having like 109 points last year, and they look about the same level of team and now have kind of two shit contracts in Jeremy Swayman after giving him that massive bag. He's playing better of late, but still has not been remotely close on the whole of an $8.25 million goaltender. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm not going to give them a grade. I feel like it's kind of insensitive, of course, with what happened off the ice with Johnny Gaudreau tragically passing away. But their young guys have been playing very good, and it's been a very encouraging season for Columbus Blue Jackets. Guys like Dmitry Vornikov, Chinnikov, Marchenko, Kent Johnson, absolutely balling out in the forward core, and Zach Werenski proving yet again that he is a legit stud, number one in the NHL, like I've been saying for years. The Carolina Hurricanes, I'll go with a B here. Actually, I'm going to go with the B minus. When looking at it, they kind of went aggressive at the deadline. They ended up trading a decent haul to get Jake Gensel, like a second round pick and a bunch of solid prospects on their end. Ended up not resulting in them even making an Eastern Conference Finals. So that's the main disappointment for the Carolina Hurricanes. Then this offseason, I think they had a pretty good draft, especially selecting Nikita Artemanov in the late second round. In free agency, they did a very good job by deciding to let Pesce and Brady Shea walk and instead bringing in Shane Gothisbehere, Sean Walker, as well as Jack Roslovic that have been fantastic adds right now. They're yet again a solid contending team, even in a retooling year that we thought this year was going to be. They're very I wouldn't say scary, but they're a decent threat in the Eastern Conference, but definitely a more so a B minus because you really thought last year was the year for the Carolina Hurricanes, and they came up short. They came up shorter than even years prior where they've made two Eastern Conference Finals, ended up losing to New York Rangers team. They're going to talk about it in a little bit. In 6 games, going down 3-0, simply unacceptable. They're a team where definitely the 2024 playoffs is the number one factor compared to maybe what they're doing right now in terms of their offseason and being a good team right now. Colorado Avalanche, similar reasons for Carolina. I'm going to go with a C+. Last year ended up losing to the Dallas Stars in part because Landeskog never came back. Nichushkin obviously entered players' assistance mid-season. It's unacceptable for Colorado to not be making Western Conference Finals at this point, considering after 2022 we thought this was going to be a dynasty, but Dallas was kind of just straight up the better team. This summer, didn't do a ton outside of re-sign Jonathan Drouin, but they also got a Casey Middlestad extension done. And coming into the season, they decided to roll the dice with Alexander Georgiev. Clearly blew up in their face. They've completely reshifted the goalie tandem, changed up the goalie tandem, and they decided to commit a lot of money to Mackenzie Blackwood. Definitely still in the mix this season if Mackenzie Blackwood can hold his own, and hopefully Landeskog comes back at some point. Still has not returned. If you told someone at the start of 2024, you would have expected him to return at this point. But yeah, Colorado, Disappointing 2024 playoffs, and that's really all that matters for this team at this point. Not like they have some bright future, but this year still could potentially win. It's going to come down to Blackwood, but they definitely should have been in on like a Linus Olmark or a Jacob Markstrom this offseason, so you didn't have to force your hand by getting Mackenzie Blackwood and locking him up on this big deal after only playing 4 games for your team. The Chicago Blackhawks, I'm going to go with the C+. I'm probably going to get some hate for this. The end of last season was very fun with Bedard winning the Calder. Obviously, they ended up getting an Alex Vlasic extension done as well in 2024. 6 years, $4.6 million was very good. But beyond that, I really wasn't that moved by Chicago in their overall rebuild. Second overall, Artem Leshinov. Wasn't my second overall prospect. Definitely would have went with Ivan Demidov, and I think that's proving to be true at this point, as well as maybe some other guys. He's going to be a very good prospect, but I don't think that was the right pick for Chicago. Rest of their draft was pretty okay. They decided to bring in a bunch of veterans on sizable contracts that have not really panned out, like Teravainen, like Bertuzzi, and as a result, Bedard has plateaued at this point relative to his last year paces, and that's really all that matters with the Chicago Blackhawks right now, getting Bedard to become that superstar, and he has not taken that star leap that we maybe expected him from this season, and this team still sucks. I mean, this team is still no doubt a bottom 2 team in the entire NHL. Not expecting them to be great, but you thought that they were going to be they are a little bit better. They were 52 points last year, but it's definitely unfortunate of a season for Chicago, given Bedard, given the overall team and some of those deals that they signed recently. Montreal, though, on the flip side of that, I love the way that their rebuild was trending right now. They get an A when looking at them at the end of the 2023-2024 season. Slavkovsky absolutely caught fire, struggling a little bit this year, but last year was very encouraging. First, Slavkovsky was like around the 70-point pace player in the calendar year of 2024 during that season. In the draft, they end up selecting Ivan Demidov 5th overall. In my opinion, pretty easily the second best player in that draft. At 5th overall, they end up extending Slavkovsky at 8 years, $7.6 million. That deal obviously looks a lot better on July 1st of 2024 than now, but I still think it's a solid deal. Also in the draft, I forgot to point out, they got Michael Hage, and then they ended up trading for Patrik Laine, getting a second-round pick to take on Patrik Laine, who has been great for them, especially on that power play, just offers such a new dimension for that team. They got Laine and Caulfield out there. You can't guard all of them. And when looking at Caulfield this season, the finishing touch has definitely come back to him, on top of Lane Hudson looking like maybe not future star number 1, but it definitely offensively looking like that elite offensive defenseman that he was promised to be. It is very encouraging if you're a Montreal Canadiens fan. Demidov, Lane Hudson debut, Caulfield scoring, ripping goals again, and Slavkovsky definitely taking a step in the calendar year of 2024. The Dallas Stars, I'll go with a B for the Dallas Stars. Made the Western Conference Finals in 2024. Definitely underwhelming to get eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers after making the Western Conference Finals the year prior, also making Game 6. But in that 2023-2024 season, the 2024 part, there were definitely some encouraging pieces. Wyatt Johnston really broke out. Logan Stankoven in his 24 games scored like 14, 15 points. And in the playoffs, it was pretty encouraging. At the end of 2024 season, he would have given that season like an A- to an A. In the draft, they take Emil Hemming. Okay pick. We'll see what he turns into. Didn't love their free agency outside of re-signing Duchesne. Somehow got him at another $3 million. But to get Lyubushkin and Dumba at like a combined $7 million the next 2 to 3 years was definitely concerning. And then to start this season, it is definitely concerning, considering the fact that Robertson, Hintz, Heiskanen, their big 3 that are in their mid-20s, have regressed massively offensively, on top of Wyatt Johnson kind of regressing offensively. Logan Stankoven looking like a very good top 6 forward, though. And Marchment, Duchesne, and Sagan were absolutely balling out before Sagan's injury. Ottinger got paid, and he's looked like he's been worth the money, looking like solidifying himself yet again as a top 8 goalie maybe in the NHL, definitely top 10. Solid for Dallas. They're definitely going to be a threat this year yet again in the playoffs if their stars start to wake up. But yeah, you can't really say they hit it out of the park, considering the start of this season is a little bit concerning. So I'm going to go with a B. Utah Hockey Club. We are only considering the Utah Hockey Club with this, not the Arizona Coyotes. So you got to go with an A. It was very productive year for the Utah Hockey Club. They got a team. That's awesome. And then they got ultra aggressive, trading for guys like Sergachev and Marino at the draft, on top of swinging on a guy like TJ Ginla at 6th overall that I'm still decently high on. They extended Dylan Gunther on a steal of a deal at 8 years, $7.14 million. I said that that in the moment, and he's already playing north of a $7.14 million player. And yeah, it's looking like they're taking a solid step this year. Don't think that they're going to make the playoffs. I think the 8 teams in the Western Conference are kind of locked up, but I think there's a decent chance they finish in that 9 spot, finish around 85 to 92 points, which was really the goal this season. You definitely wanted to make the playoffs, but if you're being a little bit realistic, you wanted to just take that big step in terms of being like a fringe wildcard team in the mix, playing somewhat important games in March and April. Definitely a successful season for Utah. Logan Cooley also absolutely blowing out on like 70-point pace. Great season for Utah. They get an A. Detroit, I'm going to go with a B-. They did fall off at the end of the 2023-2024 season, had that brutal losing streak, but they weren't really expected to be fully in the playoff mix, so I can't really kill them for that, say it was some kind of massive disappointment. And the most important thing in that 2023-2024 season, especially the 2024 part, is Lucas Raymond really stepped up, really took that next step, finished with, 71, 72 points. The offseason was kind of a mixed bag. Draft picked up Michael Brandsegg-Nygaard. He was pretty solid. I had him about in that range. Then they traded away Jake Wallman. That was an absolute disaster, attaching a second-round pick for him, but he kind of made up for that in Steve Yzerman by extending Lucas Raymond at 8 years, $8.07. He's already playing like an $8 million player this year for sure, on top of Moritz Seider, getting him done at 8 years, $8.55 million. Very good deals there. The season on the ice for the Red Wings is kind of a disaster right now in terms of the overall team, but I'm not that concerned. Simon Edvinsson has played very good. Moritz Seider's yet again proving that he's going to be worth 8.55. Lucas Raymond has been amazing for this team, and some of their young guys in minors or juniors are playing very good, like ASP, Trey Augustine, Sebastian Kosa, and Dmitry Buchelikov. They ended up firing Derek Lalonde. That was probably long overdue. They weren't going to fire him after last season, but they should have fired him like a month before. Don't love the Todd McClellan hire, but he's an experienced guy. So it's okay, I guess. But yeah, I think a B- is fair. I'm not ready to tear down the Yzer plan like some others, considering their young guys are playing so good, but it's definitely unfortunate. You expect it to be in the mix yet again this season. Your young players are playing good. That's really all that matters at the end of the day. But some of their other deals are looking horrendous, like Andrew Kopp, JT Compher is kind of looking like shit. But yeah, B-. I think that's fair. I don't think that's me hating on the Yzer plan. St. Louis, I'm going to go with the B- as well. Last year was kind of exciting, but it was more so just the goalie tandem that carried them to even somewhat being in the playoff mix, finishing with 92 points. In the offseason, they announced that Alexander Steen is going to be the next general manager in like 2 seasons. I like having that succession plan instead of Doug Armstrong, like, doing wild shit at the end of his tenure to kind of save his job and then ending up getting fired. He knows that he's handing it to Alexander Steen. Got to be somewhat responsible. In the draft, they pick up Adam Juracek. Okay, solid pick. They definitely needed a defenseman prospect. This also in the offseason, Holloway and Broberg, very good offer sheets. That is definitely the number one thing that they did this season in terms of picking up young talent. They definitely needed that under 25 talent. That's what this team was severely lacking. They do have a good prospect pool. But yeah, they needed actual NHL young talent. Got that done. Those 2 deals look fantastic. This season, though, started out slow, but did get an upgrade at coach with Jim Montgomery over Drew Bannister. But this team is not close to the playoffs, and I still don't think that they're going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. They ended up getting Cam Fowler. They're in a weird spot, but I think the 2024 year was pretty solid for a St. Louis Blues fan. I don't really have that many thoughts on it. The Edmonton Oilers, I'll go with an A. Last season, Bouchard absolutely broke out. Zach Hyman was scoring goals left and right. They end up making the Stanley Cup final. In the offseason, I thought they had a pretty good offseason, especially free agency, in getting Jeff Skinner, who's kind of been underwhelming. But Victor Arvidsson, on top of being able to re-sign guys like Adam Henrique, like Connor Brown, Corey Perry, they bring back the same team. However, then they hire Stan Bowman, was not really that high on that move. And then the offer sheets come in. They probably should have found a way to match Holloway, but Broberg at the time, 2 years, $4.6 million, and he was barely cracking the lineup. That's kind of revisionist history. They end up dumping Cody Ceci, which was a good move, only dumped like a 3rd-round pick and got Ty Emberson back in that trade. They lock up Leon Draisaitl. They pay a lot for him, but he's worth the money. He's a legit superstar, 8 years, $14 million. And this season, lost their first like 3 or 4 games, but they are yet again looking like a true contender, looking like one of the Stanley Cup favorites. So yeah, made Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, looking like yet another contender. I think they get an A. I think that's pretty fair for the Edmonton Oilers. The Seattle Kraken, I'm going with a D plus. Last year was kind of a disaster after making the playoffs, safely missed the playoffs. In the draft, they pick up Berkeley Catton, who I really like as a prospect, but I thought they kind of needed a defenseman. In free agency, Ron Francis goes ultra aggressive. The Brandon Montour deal looks pretty good right now. I still don't love 7 years, but the Chandler Stevenson deal is straight up horrendous. His underlying numbers are among the worst in the entire NHL. 7 years, $6.25 million. He's now signed that in the Philip Grubauer deal. Absolutely garbage. Matty Beniers extension, it can still be solid, but right now, 7 years, 7.14. The offense has not come for him like we maybe expected after his rookie season when he had 57 points. He needs to step up, but the Joey Daccord deal is pretty good. The 5x5. And then this season, although Vince Dunn got hurt to start, this team is just bleh. His team is just perfectly bleh. Does nothing really at a high level outside of maybe Joey Daccord in net. They're yet again going to miss the playoffs probably by like 10 plus points, and nothing's really going to change in the next 2 to 3 years unless Shane Wright pops as an absolute star or Berkeley Catton. But even that's probably not going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. It's probably more of like a 3 to 5 year outlook. So yeah, Seattle is kind of just stuck in not even mediocrity, below averageness. I think it's a D plus for the Seattle Kraken. Next up, Winnipeg Jets. I'm going to go with an A-. Last year was really fun. 110-point team. Absolutely smashed expectations. Did kind of get dogged by the Colorado Avalanche, though. Their defense core got exposed. Thought that they had a pretty good draft, though, picking up Alphonse Frey in the second round. In the offseason, they lost to Foley. They lost Monahan, but you were kind of expecting that. Those guys were most definitely rental deals for the Winnipeg Jets. They got Perfetti on the cheap, and then this year they came out firing yet again and looking like they're a true contender, where a lot of people like me thought that they might regress back to a wild card team. They are yet again a very good team and could potentially go on a deep run. I'm going to go with an A-. The Vegas Golden Knights, I'm going to go with a B. Last year they went pretty nuclear at the deadline, and although Hertl and Hanifin weren't just rentals, they're obviously going to be on the team for the next 5+ years, unless they get traded. But the Vegas Golden Knights end up losing in the first round to the Dallas Stars. Unacceptable when you got a core as old as they are, even though they won the Stanley Cup last year. Again, after being so aggressive at that deadline, they kind of set expectations high for them. They ended up losing Stevenson, and Marchessault ended up being the right decision, though, to let them walk. And the team is yet again a high-level contender. Right now, they're first in the Western Conference, I believe, and will have a decent chance to go on a deep run. I think a B is fair, considering an underwhelming first-round exit, and they do have high expectations. So yeah, a B for the Vegas Golden Knights. The LA Kings, I'm going to go with the C+. End of last year, meet yet again with the Edmonton Oilers. Losing just 5 games, get absolutely exposed. In the draft, they end up picking up Liam Greentree, which I thought was a pretty decent pick considering it was 25th overall, and he was like my 15th overall prospect. In free agency, Warren Fogle, Joel Edmondson, not too hot on those deals. Byfield, I thought was going to be a great extension, 5 years, $6.25 million, but he has not lived up to his end of the bargain this season. Drew Doughty gets hurt immediately, but this team is still clicking at a decently high rate, like 105-point pace. But I still don't think that they're at all a threat in the playoffs. Like I don't know. Like they could win the Pacific Division, and I'd probably still pick whatever wild card team is playing against them, just because although Kopitar's balling out, Kempe's balling out, I still just don't trust that team in the playoffs, considering their lack of star power like we've seen the last 3 years. The Ottawa Senators, I'm going to go with a B. By the start of 2024, they were basically out of the playoffs, and they were at such a low point considering they got that first-round pick stolen away because of the Evgeny Dadonov trade, no trade clause fiasco, on top of the fact that they fired Pierre Dorian in like December of that year. Or no, wait. Yeah. And then also they fired, why am I blanking on the goddamn coach's name at this point? They fired DJ Smith. They fired DJ Smith also to start that season. They played okay down the stretch, ended up selling at the deadline, not getting that good of a return for Tarasenko. But in the offseason, they go out and they trade for Linus Ullmark, solving their goalie problem. They end up extending him down the line. In the draft, I think the Yakimchuk pick is okay. I still had a lot of guys higher than that. But I think an offensive defenseman was a solid pick in that spot. They ended up scooping up David Perron in free agency. He's been hurt a lot, but I think he can be a decent add. Started off slow this season, but really caught fire of late the last month and a half. And as a result, they're pretty safely in the second wildcard spot. At this point, Tim Stützle looks yet again on superstar trajectory, playing like a top 30 player in the NHL this season. Drake Batherson, around point per game right now, only making $4.9 million. Tkachuk playing great. Sanderson playing solid. I wouldn't say he's playing amazing. amazing right now. And then Josh Norris bouncing back in a big way as that second line center. Maybe not worth $8 million, but considering we thought he was like cooked after those shoulder injuries, it is definitely an encouraging start to this year. Maybe the end of last year was a little bit, or the start of this year was a little bit disappointing, but it's definitely starting to come up for the Ottawa Senators. And as a result, they get a B. The San Jose Sharks, I'm going with an A+. They're one of the few A+ that I'm handing out, considering the fact that at the end of last season, the goal was to tank. They ended up getting the first overall pick in Macklin Celebrini. And even in the 2023-2024 season, William Eklund really proved that he had a bright, bright future at 20 years old, had like 45 points. In the draft, they end up selecting Macklin Celebrini. They trade up for 14 to 11, like a day before the draft, ends up getting them Sam Dickinson, which was a great pick for them. Also got Igor Chernyshov and Leo Salim Wallenius that I'm decently high on. So they absolutely killed the draft. They end up taking on Jake Wallman for a second-round pick. Absolutely insane to get that second round pick for a guy that became their number one defenseman. Just absolutely nuts. And on top of it, in free agency, Toffoli deal looks pretty solid. Maybe a little bit too much term, but he's definitely been worth 6.25 in terms of mentoring the young guys. And Alex Wenberg, another veteran, two-way, middle sixer, 2 years, $5 million. Solid ads to make this team a fun team. Don't like the Barclay Goodrow waiver claim and the Cody Ceci trade. I think they probably could have got more out of that, but it is what it is. Not the end of the world. Not going to kill the rebuild by any stretch. And then their last move of the summer, Askarov. They traded a decent haul for him. A first-round pick, as well as a guy that was a former first-round pick in David Enstrom that they got from there. Oh, I forgot to mention the Hurdle trade I really liked a lot. They got a first in David Enstrom, ended up trading Enstrom in the Askarov trade, but I liked the Hurdle trade. He was 30 years old. He had like 6 years left on his deal. Get rid of him, especially if you can get assets for that, even if you have to retain. But yeah, Askarov. They trade for Askarov, and this year he's killing it at the AHL. NHL level. At the NHL level this season, Celebrini looks like that franchise superstar future center. Already point per game this season, on top of Eklund taking another step, on pace for like 65 to 70 points, playing a shit ton. Mikael Granlund's trade stock continues to soar. Probably going to trade him at the deadline. On top of Zetterlund playing great, Wallman playing great, Dickinson in the OHL playing great, 46 points in 26 games. Team Canada got to play him more. And Will Smith, although he has been struggling, I'm not too worried. I would have expected him to have some kind of rookie struggles, considering he's kind of an undersized, skilled center. He's going to adjust. He has been playing better offensively of late, but just a great season for the San Jose Sharks in terms of their rebuild, getting their true franchise superstar, and really every other piece is working out for the most part. Mike Grier is absolutely killing it right now. They get an A+. The Minnesota Wild, I'm going to go with an A-. Last year, or the start of the 2024 year, they were basically out of the playoffs because their goaltending was so bad. They had some runs where you thought they were going to maybe have a little bit of hope. But in the back half of that season, Kaprizov yet again was playing like a superstar. Boldy was playing great. Faber was really solidifying his case to potentially be a Calder winner, as well as Joel Eriksson Ek having a monster season. So they were building towards something. It was, again, just October, November, they got like 860 goaltending from Gustafsson and Fleury that cooked them in the playoff race. Then it comes draft time. They snag Zeev Boyum at 12th overall. Great value there, as well as taking a risk on a guy like Aaron Kiviharju in the 4th round. In free agency, don't really do much. They overpay Jakob Trenin, in my opinion, but they extend Brock Faber at 8 years, $8.5 million. Pretty good deal. And then this year, amazing season. Kaprizov playing at a Hart level, Gustafsson playing at a Vezina level, Faber proving that last year was no fluke. He's going to be a legit number one defenseman. He's going to be worth that contract. Marco Rossi breaking out in a big way, on pace for like 65, 70 points. And Jake Middleton, another guy that got a decent extension this summer, proving that he's pretty good offensively as well as good defensively, and he's going to be worth that extension. Boldy and Ek also playing pretty good as well. And Minnesota safely in a playoff spot. So I think you got to go with an A-. Start of this year, basically since like August, since the Brock Faber signing, probably like an A+. But again, the end of the 2023-2024 season was kind of underwhelming in the sense that they missed the playoffs by like 10 points after safely making it in prior years. Nashville, D+. This is a tough spot because the end of the 2023-2024 season was so fun. They go on that 18-game point streak, end up creeping into the playoffs, give Vancouver a decent run for their money, but end up coming up short. But the offseason was a disaster. They end up trading away Ryan McDonough in order to bring in Brady Shea, also bring in Steven Stamkos. And Jonathan Marchessault, everything kind of doesn't work for the most part. Trade Askarov, and again, I think they got a decent haul, but considering they suck now and they decided to roll with UC Saros and win now, and they stink, and they traded their goalie of the future, a disaster. So I think that right now, the last 7 months definitely mean more than them going on that deep, that deep point streak and then losing in the first round. So yeah, it's definitely underwhelming for the Nashville Predators, and their future is definitely murky at this point. On the flip side of that, the New Jersey Devils are basically the reverse of the Predators. End of the 2023-2024 season was a disaster. Final 40 games, goaltending stinks, defense stinks. Fitzgerald doesn't really make a move until the deadline, until he brings in like Jake Allen way too late by that point. They're out of the playoff race, but he fixes it this offseason. He brings in Markstrom, he brings in Dillon, he brings in Pesce, he brings in Kovacevic. They draft Salayev as well as Yegorov to hopefully further fix the defense core and the goaltending down the line. And now they safely sit in a playoff spot. They look like a contender and look like they're going to be a contender for the next 5 years. So yeah, similarly to who was I talking about before? I don't know, like New Jersey, the last 7 months have been like an A+, but before that, it was like a legit F. So I've settled on a B for the New Jersey Devils. I think that's a fair grade. For Philadelphia, I'm also going to go with a B, even though the back half of the 2023-2024 season kind of was a disaster. They were safely at a playoff spot, end up missing by going 19-21-6 in the 2024 portion of the 2023-2024 season. I'm not going to kill them for that. Similarly to Detroit, they weren't expected to make the playoffs. So even though they kind of shut the bed, that's just kind of what team they were last year. They far exceeded expectation the first 2 to 3 months, just came back down to earth. And Danny Briere knew that because at the deadline, he traded Sean Walker for like a first-round pick. Very good. Ended up taking on Ryan Johansson. In the draft, they select Jet Luchenko. They trade back. Still not that high in Luchenko, even though he made the opening night roster, is on Team Canada. I think they should have took someone like Zeev Boyum, but they ended up taking Luchenko. They also traded their 2024 first. That was 32nd overall from the Claude Giroux deal. End up trading that with Edmonton, so which is looking right now, unless Edmonton makes the Western Conference Finals, that it's going to be like 26th, 27th overall. But yeah, didn't do a ton this offseason, but the main reason why they have a B is because Matvei Michkov came over. And Matvei Michkov has been legit, looked like that play-driving, playmaker, goal scorer of the franchise for Matvei Michkov. He looks like he is 1,000% legit. And as a result, 2024 has been a decent success for the Philadelphia Flyers. The Tampa Bay Lightning, I'm going to go with the B as well. Ended the 2023-2024 season a little bit disappointing by getting kind of kicked in by the Florida Panthers en route to their first Stanley Cup win ever. They're kind of the cream of the crop in Florida right now based on the last 2 seasons. But Brisebois does not just sit there idly and let Florida take over the state. He decides Florida take over the state. Let the Florida Panthers take over the state. Obviously, Florida. But Tampa Bay decides to be aggressive. They say, Stamkos, Sergachev, pack your bags. You're going elsewhere. Bring in Gensel, Sergachev, J.J. Mosier, Connor Geekie. Very good swap, very beneficial swap, better for the team. And as a result, the team is cooking right now. Vasilevsky looks like the Vas of old, and Hedman also looks like 2018 to 2021 Victor Hedman right now. The New York Rangers, I'm going to go with the C+. I know that this season, it's an F. Don't get me wrong, but this team did make the Western Conference Finals in 2024. There were some progress. Panarin balled out last year. You got Lafreniere really breaking out to be around the 30-30 guy. So there are some positives. Now, this season, it has been a disaster, considering they've been so bad. They've been in the news saying they're going to trade everybody. They did trade Jacob Trouba. They did finally give up on Kaapo Kakko, but I think you still got to give it a C+. I can't give them the same grade as like the Kraken or the Islanders that haven't sniffed really any success in the 2024 season. So, yeah. C+ for them. I feel like the recency bias might be pretty high on that. And I'd love to give the Rangers like a C- or something like that. Pittsburgh Penguins, though, I'm going to give a D+ as well. The team is just painfully average. Crosby almost single-handedly willed them to the playoffs last year, but still came up short. Ended up trading Jake Gensel and basically entering this weird phase where they're not ready to fully commit to a rebuild, a heavy rebuild, because they're not going to trade Crosby. It looks like they're not going to trade Malkin, and Letang and Carlson are kind of untradeable at this point. So this summer, they decide to take on bad contracts and get assets for taking them on with like Cody Glass and Kevin Hayes. And now they're yet again like an 80-ish point team. They're just stuck. They're stuck in the rebuild loathing phase until Crosby, I guess, finally says like, okay, I'm ready to leave. Maybe he'll never will, which I think he never will. But they need to fully enter the rebuild because right now they're just not that good. And Mike Sullivan, for some reason, can never get fired. Next up, Vancouver. I'm going to go with an A-. Definitely exceeded expectations last year by making the playoffs. 2024 went pretty aggressive at the deadline, ended up losing the second round, but in part of that was because of the injuries to Brock Besser as well as Thatcher Demko barely playing in the playoffs. In the offseason, they smartly decide, Zadorov, Lindholm, thank you for your services. We're not going to overpay to keep you. Bring in guys like Jake DeBrusk in other depth pieces, re-sign other depth pieces like Dakota Joshua and Teddy Bluger. And as a result, they're yet again a high-level team. The Miller and Pedersen drama, I don't really fully buy that much. I don't think it's the end of the world thing. And Demko is finally back. Quinn Hughes is still playing at a Norris level. Connor Garland's playing very good. A-, you could argue an A for the Vancouver Canucks. Toronto, C+. At the end of the day, what really matters most is they lost to Boston in 7 games. Yet again, history repeats itself. Yet again, was a fun season, though, watching Matthews score 69 goals in the offseason. Treliving doesn't make any massive moves, but he makes some minor tweaks and brings in Stolarz to battle for the starting job. Him and Woll are looking like one of the best goalie tandems in the NHL and are locked up the next 2 to 3 years. That was very good. The Woll extension, 3 years, $3.66 million. Very good. Also brings in OEL and Chris Tanev. So good offseason, and it's looking like they're yet again going to be a playoff team. But again, what you got to reference as the year in 2024 for the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's definitely losing to the Boston Bruins yet again. And then the Washington Capitals, last but not least, A+. Started the year by giving Alexei Protas a 5-year deal at $3.38 million. Looks like an insane deal. He has 30 points in 35 games right now. Then at the end of last year, despite trading at the deadline, selling at the deadline, Edmondson, Kuznetsov, and Mantha, they end up going on an insane run at the end of the season. Ovi turns back the clocks, and they make the playoffs. Yes, they got swept, but that was really fun to watch for a Washington Capitals fan. And it gave ownership management proof that if we make some big tweaks, we can actually be a pretty decent team next year. So they decided to go out, trade for PLD, Mangiapane, Logan Thompson, Jacob Chikrin, and dump Beck Malenstein for a second-round pick. And now they're a good team. The draft was pretty solid. Tarek Parasak and Cole Hudson. Parasak, I think, was a little bit of a reach, but Cole Hudson was a steal based on what we're seeing right now. So overall, solid draft for their first and second round picks. And now they're very good. They're a very good team that has not really any identifiable flaws. Maybe they lack the star and talent, but they're definitely going to be a threat in the Eastern Conference this year. It's amazing if you're a Washington Capitals fan, considering you thought in January of 2024, Ovi was kind of struggling to start the season. You thought it's over. We're rebuilding. We got to blow it up. And now they're one of the premier teams yet again in the NHL. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about these grades? Who was I too harsh on? Who was I too light on? I'll be seeing the next one. Happy New Year's.